I think I sort of approach that with anything that I pour my heart into and create is you've done everything you can.
A quiet rupture inside the royal inner circle has detonated the most unsettling shock in months. Confirmation has surfaced that Harry is back within palace walls, but nothing about this return follows tradition or protocol. It happened off the books, wrapped in silence, and the consequences are already rippling through the family's most guarded layers. And then there's Meghan's reaction, raw, explosive, and impossible to contain. What began as a discreet move has ignited a full-scale battle for control. Old fractures are being forced open again, and from this moment forward, every move Harry makes comes with a price. Something compelled him to cross that threshold, and now the fallout is unavoidable. An arrival no one saw coming. Just after 11 that night, a security officer on late duty clocked a dark Range Rover gliding toward Windsor through a gate almost never used. The SUV crept along a secluded service lane linking staff housing to utility buildings far from the public routes. The driver produced clearance details that bypassed routine checks entirely. Without delay, the gates parted, and the vehicle vanished into the castle's unlit grounds. Moments later, Harry stepped out from the back seat, dressed to disappear, dark layers, a cap shadowing his face. His close protection officer stayed tight at his shoulder as they moved briskly toward a side door typically reserved for high-ranking personnel. Before they could reach it, the door swung inward. Someone inside had been tracking their timing. Harry crossed the threshold and was ushered through private passages that wind through centuries of stone. As the overnight cleaning team began their rounds in the staterooms a little after midnight, one worker pushing a supply trolley near the private wing noticed something unusual, light spilling from a room that was always dark at that hour. Through a door left slightly ajar, hushed voices drifted into the corridor. The worker caught the weight of an older man's voice, low, measured, unmistakably authoritative, but the second voice remained a mystery. What carried through the gap in the door wasn't small talk. It was tense, deliberate, charged with urgency. Hours later, another staff member setting up the breakfast areas before First Light noticed something else that didn't belong. Extra security personnel were stationed in corridors that were normally silent overnight. Protection officers stood rigid near entrances leading to the private family wings. That alone spoke volumes. Someone significant had arrived without the advance warnings that usually preceded royal movements. When questioned, the duty officer shut it down instantly, offering no explanation for the sudden lockdown. As dawn approached, the shift change brought more eyes and more unease into the castle. Staff exchanged quick looks, murmured theories, and half-finished sentences about what had unfolded while most of the world slept. One whispered about a dark, tinted vehicle seen in the private family courtyard. Another claimed to have heard voices and footsteps echoing from the king's private study long after midnight. Slowly, the fragments aligned. During routine morning checks, a household manager noticed something impossible to ignore: fresh coffee cups and used glassware sitting in the king's private sitting room, items that hadn't been there during the final inspection the night before. There was no mistaking it. Someone had spent hours in that room after the palace was meant to be asleep. The manager also noted that security systems had been triggered in a configuration reserved for shielding senior family members, not standard overnight operations. By 7 a.m., the truth had quietly threaded its way through the staff. Prince Harry had entered Windsor Castle without a press alert, without an official schedule, without anyone outside these walls knowing. The information passed only between trusted hands, those who understood how dangerous loose words could be. Everyone knew secrecy like this pointed to fragile family business, not ceremonies, not appearances. The mood inside the palace shifted. Tasks were carried out with precision and caution as staff deliberately avoided areas where confidential discussions might still be unfolding. Protection officers did not move. Their continued presence made one thing clear: Harry hadn't left. In the kitchens, another detail sealed it. Breakfast orders for the king's private dining room called for 2 portions instead of the solitary plate Charles typically preferred at sunrise. The dietary notes matched Harry's known preferences exactly. Any lingering doubt vanished. As the morning wore on, Harry remained hidden deep within the private quarters, his vehicle still secured in the inner courtyard, invisible to the outside world. Palace officials issued no comment, no denial, no acknowledgement. The silence itself carried weight. It signaled how critical it was to keep his presence contained. Behind closed doors, senior staff began quietly assessing the consequences. Harry had not been inside a royal residence on English soil for a very long time, and this return was rewriting far more than schedules. Harry's unannounced return, without Meghan, without the children, sent a clear signal. This wasn't a courtesy stop or a sentimental detour. It was urgent, private, and serious. The late-hour arrival and the layered security made one thing obvious: whatever needed to be said could never be trusted to a phone line or a video screen. Something consequential was unfolding behind Windsor's ancient walls. The truth of Harry's presence traveled in hushed fragments, never spoken aloud. Everyone involved understood the unbreakable rule of silence surrounding royal affairs. Still, the awareness of a meeting this extraordinary stirred a restless mix of tension and curiosity through the palace corridors. The coming hours would decide whether this reunion stayed buried or detonated into global headlines. Inside the king's private study, Charles sat behind his broad mahogany desk when a knock cut through the stillness. Harry entered and took the leather chair opposite him. The air carried the scent of aging paper and polished wood. Thick curtains sealed the room from the outside world. One lamp cast a warm glow, stretching shadows across walls crowded with portraits and family history. Without ceremony, the king slid a heavy folder across the desk toward his younger son. Harry opened it and began turning pages dense with legal language and financial figures. The papers mapped properties, holdings, and long-standing estate arrangements. Trusts, inheritances, future transfers, structures designed to last generations. As Harry read, Charles spoke evenly, walking him through clauses and contingencies. The tone stayed precise, almost clinical. Emotion was deliberately left outside the room. The focus shifted to the months ahead. Charles laid out plans for upcoming royal obligations, explaining where traditions could bend and where they could not. He spoke of visible gaps forming within the institution as senior figures slowed down or stepped away. Harry listened in silence as his father framed duty as continuity, legacy as responsibility. Then Charles addressed the reality neither of them could ignore. His health was not what it once was. Time, he said plainly, was no longer a luxury. William and Catherine would soon carry more than anyone had anticipated, and they would need reinforcement. Unity, he stressed, would become essential. He proposed a role for Harry, defined, limited, and deliberate, one that did not require a full return or permanent relocation. Harry pushed back with measured questions. How would this actually work? What about the press? The public memory? Charles responded with plans already drawn up by palace advisors, step-by-step strategies to slowly recalibrate Harry's public image through selective charity work and tightly controlled appearances. Nothing open-ended. Everything contained. Boundaries were clearly marked. Expectations were written in ink. Then the discussion turned financial. Charles outlined income streams and property rights still linked to Harry's standing within the family, despite his life overseas. Some holdings, Harry learned, required ongoing oversight and shared authorization. As he read further, another realization landed harder. Decisions made while he was gone had quietly reshaped the future his children would inherit. That discovery shifted the weight of the room. Urgency replaced distance. Charles produced more paperwork, proposed revisions, protective measures, recalibrated agreements. These changes, he explained, were meant to safeguard Harry's interests while honoring his independence. But they couldn't move forward without Harry's approval. Every page reflected months of preparation with legal and financial experts. Nothing had been left to chance. Harry read carefully, line by line. He asked pointed questions about long-term consequences, about what could be undone and what could not. Charles answered without deflection, offering clarity instead of persuasion. The exchange stayed formal, but the gravity was unmistakable. Hours slipped by as they navigated complexity and consequence. Eventually, the king leaned back and shifted the tone. He spoke of regret, of distance, of time lost to silence and strain. He admitted his longing to know his grandchildren not as headlines, but as family. He acknowledged missteps on both sides and spoke of rebuilding slowly, without spectacle. The words were cautious, but they didn't sound scripted. Harry responded just as plainly. He described the pressure that had driven him away, the sense of being unheard, the fears he felt had been dismissed when protection mattered most. The room held both versions of the past at once, unfinished, unresolved, and heavy with what still hung in the balance. Charles absorbed it all without rising to defend himself. He acknowledged parts of Harry's experience, conceding where pain had been real, while offering alternative context for moments Harry saw differently. Even as they touched old wounds, the exchange stayed controlled, measured voices, steady restraint. Eventually, both seemed to sense they had gone as far into emotional territory as the night would allow. The conversation steered back to logistics. Charles outlined what would come next, additional meetings, continued discretion, and a series of private discussions stretching into the months ahead. He suggested a loose framework for future talks. Harry didn't shut the door on any of it, but made one thing clear: he needed time. Time to read, to think, and to speak with Meghan before committing to anything permanent. Charles agreed, though he underscored the urgency behind certain timelines. Legal windows and event schedules were already closing, and some decisions couldn't be suspended forever. Harry acknowledged the pressure, yet refused to be cornered into choices that would shape his family's future. The meeting concluded with a shared understanding. Progress had been made, even if resolution was still far away. Just after 3 in the morning, they stood and exchanged a formal handshake. It was brief, restrained, and heavy with meaning, an acknowledgement of conversations delayed for years. Whether it marked the beginning of reconciliation or merely a pause in conflict remained unresolved as Harry turned away to decide his next move. What followed only deepened the mystery. After leaving the meeting, Harry moved through the palace with an unusual sense of intention. Staff noticed him heading toward wings of Windsor steeped in history, but rarely visited by the modern royal family. He avoided public routes and guest areas, drifting instead toward quieter spaces layered with memory. Workers exchanged looks, but said nothing, bound by protocol. A housekeeper saw Harry enter a room long sealed off for renovation. Inside, little had changed since his childhood. Furniture sat under dust cloths, frozen in time from decades of family gatherings. Harry moved slowly, brushing his fingers across surfaces, studying objects tied to earlier years. It didn't look like he was searching for anything tangible. Security tracked his movements remotely, choosing not to intervene. As a royal family member, Harry still held access rights that overrode his current status. His path made no practical sense. Instead of moving efficiently, he jumped between locations connected by memory rather than layout. He lingered in a small library where family photographs traced generations along the walls. Kitchen staff later spotted him passing through service corridors meant only for workers. His presence there disrupted the usual order. He paused at stairwells and hidden doorways, routes that revealed the palace from behind the scenes rather than from its grand facades. From those service passages, familiar rooms looked different. Harry seemed to be rebuilding his understanding of the place from multiple angles. On an upper floor long out of use, a maintenance worker encountered him standing alone among old portraits. The faces staring back belonged to ancestors from centuries past. The paintings had never moved, silently witnessing every private fracture and public evolution of the institution. Harry studied them closely, reading nameplates, holding eye contact with figures long gone, as if searching for answers in the lineage itself. Harry's fixation on lineage felt intentional, not nostalgic. Administrative staff later noticed him entering the archive offices where royal records were kept. He formally requested access to specific files, documents tied to family precedent, protocol decisions, and historical exceptions. The archivists complied within procedure, though they quietly noted how unusual the request was. For more than an hour, Harry reviewed fragile papers and handwritten records, jotting notes into a personal journal. His attention kept circling the same themes: rank, titles, succession, and inheritance pathways. Whispers followed him down the corridors. This was not how royal visits normally unfolded. Nothing about his movements fit established patterns. Childhood rooms, hidden service routes, portrait halls, archival research. Taken together, it painted the picture of someone trying to redefine where and if they still belonged. Staff sensed they were witnessing something pivotal, even if the destination remained unclear. Harry later entered the private chapel, a space reserved for intimate family rites away from public view. He sat alone in silence for nearly half an hour. The staff assigned to the chapel stayed respectfully distant, acutely aware of his presence without intruding. That spiritual pause added another layer to what was already beginning to resemble a personal reckoning. Security logs captured every step. The record showed Harry accessing more restricted areas in a single morning than most family members entered over months. His sweeping movement through the palace suggested two equally possible meanings: farewell or return. Which one proved true depended on decisions still unfolding elsewhere. Staff in the private residential wing noticed Harry stopping outside occupied rooms. He never knocked. He never entered. He simply stood there, motionless, as if weighing choices he wasn't ready to make. Those pauses revealed the conflict beneath the surface, purpose colliding with unresolved relationships. A senior household manager gathered reports from multiple departments into a sealed internal briefing. The document was flagged for review by officials overseeing security and family affairs. Harry's actions broke no rules, but deviations from normal behavior were always recorded. The palace survived by tracking patterns and by paying attention when those patterns broke. By late morning, Harry's wandering finally carried him back toward the residential wing. Staff resumed their duties, though none could shake what they had seen. The morning had exposed a man suspended between identities, drawn back to the foundations that shaped him while living far beyond them. Elsewhere, the silence shattered. Prince William arrived at his Kensington Palace office shortly after 8. His private secretary stood waiting, face already telling the story. The door closed softly before the words were spoken. Trusted confirmation had come in. Harry was at Windsor. He had arrived the night before, and he was still there. William froze. His jaw set. His hands tightened before he spoke. He demanded to know who had sanctioned this and why he had been excluded. The answer landed hard. Absolute secrecy. Orchestrated personally by the king. Only a handful had known. William didn't hesitate. He ordered an urgent message sent to Windsor requesting immediate access to his father. This was not optional. As arrangements were made, he paced the room, composure giving way to visible anger. Years spent containing fallout, repairing damage, defending the institution, all of it surged back at once. This meeting felt like a line crossed. Within half an hour, William was on the move. Vehicles were readied. Security scrambled. The drive passed without a word as he stared out the window, mind racing through consequences. Every lecture about unity and loyalty echoed hollow now. His father had chosen secrecy. Had chosen Harry. As the gates of Windsor Castle came into view, one truth was unavoidable. Whatever had begun in the shadows was about to collide head-on with daylight. William moved fast through the palace corridors, his stride sharp and unforgiving. Staff stepped aside instinctively, eyes dropping as the Prince of Wales passed, the tension unmistakable in his posture. His protection officer kept pace a few steps behind. When William reached his father's private study, he didn't pause. He pushed the door open without knocking. King Charles looked up from his desk, an expression crossing his face that blended expectation with weary acceptance. He had known this moment was coming. William didn't waste time. He demanded an explanation. Why had he been deliberately shut out of a meeting involving Harry and family affairs? Charles tried to answer calmly, explaining his intention to create space for an unpressured, private exchange. He said sibling dynamics would have complicated the conversation. William cut him off. Transparency, he argued, wasn't optional when decisions touched the entire family. The king countered that Harry needed to speak freely, without feeling cornered by his older brother. He insisted the discussion had centered on logistics, not power or succession, and posed no threat to William's role. The words failed to land. William pushed back hard. Secret meetings, he said, were exactly what destabilized the institution. The monarchy survived on unity and clarity, not whispered arrangements. Harry had stepped away, had publicly criticized the family, and had fractured trust. Allowing him to reappear in private negotiations without full disclosure sent the wrong signal. Charles bristled. As king, he argued, he still had a responsibility as a father to manage complexity with care. William shot back that sentiment couldn't outweigh duty. The exchange escalated, voices tightening. Charles accused William of being inflexible. William fired back that his father was letting guilt cloud judgment. Years of unresolved strain surfaced in sharp, unfiltered words. Eventually, the temperature dropped. Both men reined themselves in. Charles outlined the substance of his meeting: legal matters, financial structures, obligations that demanded attention regardless of emotion. William conceded the necessity of addressing those issues, but drew a firm line. From now on, he would be included. No more blind spots. No more surprises. Charles agreed to clearer communication, maintaining that his choice had been justified by the circumstances. William accepted the concession, though dissatisfaction lingered plainly. Charles reassured him directly nothing discussed with Harry endangered William's position or Catherine's role. The goal was containment, not reconciliation by force. William then asked the question that mattered most. Was Harry still in the castle? Charles confirmed he was, staying in the guest wing. William didn't hesitate. He insisted on speaking with his brother before anything else moved forward. Charles paused, then agreed, cautioning him to keep the encounter controlled. William turned and left, anger now sharpened into resolve. Whatever Harry intended, it would not unfold without his scrutiny. Across the ocean, the silence broke differently. Meghan woke in her Montecito bedroom as sunlight spilled through the curtains. She reached for her phone, half awake. The screen lit up with missed calls, alerts, and unread messages. One headline froze her instantly. Palace sources confirm Prince Harry secretly returns to Windsor Castle. The timestamp showed the story had gone live just 30 minutes earlier. Meghan bolted upright, her pulse spiking as reality set in. She scrolled furiously, jumping from site to site, each one echoing the same revelation. Anonymous palace sources were confirming it. Harry had arrived at Windsor Castle late the night before for a covert meeting with King Charles. The coverage buzzed with theories about reconciliation and hidden negotiations. What none of them mentioned was her. Not a single report suggested she had been with him. She called Harry immediately. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She fired off text after text, demanding an explanation. The messages went through, but the silence on the other end only grew heavier. She checked the time difference. No excuse. He should have been awake. The lack of response felt intentional. Meghan climbed out of bed and began pacing, trying to steady herself. Her mind replayed their last conversations. Harry had alluded to vague business matters, brushed off her questions, acted distracted. She'd assumed stress. Now the pieces rearranged themselves into something far more disturbing. The thought that he had flown to England without telling her sent a wave of nausea through her. She called again. Still nothing. She left a voicemail, forcing her voice into calm she didn't feel, asking him to call her immediately, no matter where he was. The restraint barely masked the panic and anger underneath. She hung up and stared at her phone, waiting. Alerts kept coming. Each new headline sharpened the narrative. Her absence was being framed as meaningful. Suspicious. Frustration tipped into fury. She called her closest friend and advisor, who answered instantly. Words spilled out as Meghan explained what she was seeing, what she didn't understand. Her friend had already read the reports and shared her disbelief. They speculated, circled possibilities, searched for logic. Nothing eased the knot tightening in Meghan's chest. She opened her laptop and started digging, hunting for any trace of Harry's travel. No flight records. No leaks. If he'd planned this, it had been done days earlier, carefully, completely outside her awareness. She replayed recent weeks, searching for missed signs. He'd been distant, yes, but not dishonest. Or so she thought. The realization that he'd concealed something this big hit hard. For a moment, she considered calling the palace directly. The idea died just as quickly. Contacting Windsor would look frantic, and it would leak within hours. Her relationship with Charles was already fragile. She forced herself to wait, ignoring messages flooding in from friends and associates asking for comment. She wasn't ready to give one. She drafted texts to Harry, erased them, rewrote them, anger giving way to restraint, then back again. None felt right. Beneath the emotion was something colder, fear about what decisions he might be making without her. Finally, just after 9 a.m. California time, her phone rang. Harry's name flashed on the screen. She answered instantly. His voice sounded worn, strained, nothing like she'd expected. He apologized quickly for the silence. The explanation tumbled out, hurried and defensive. The meeting, he said, had been urgent. His father had demanded secrecy for security reasons. Meghan cut him off. Why hadn't he told her? Why had he left her out? Harry claimed it had all come together too fast for discussion. She rejected that immediately. International travel didn't happen overnight. After a pause, he admitted the truth he'd known for several days. He'd convinced himself that telling her would only spark another fight. The confession landed heavily between them. Meghan felt the heat of her anger cool into something sharper, more deliberate. She asked exactly what had been discussed, specifics, not generalities. Harry responded with broad language about estate oversight and family calendars. That wasn't enough. She pressed him on whether any promises had been made or lines crossed. He insisted nothing was finalized, that everything was still provisional. Meghan didn't soften. She told him they needed to speak face-to-face immediately. When Harry mentioned another tense conversation looming with William, she cut him off. Whatever royal storm he'd stepped into could wait. His priority was his wife. Her tone made it clear there was no alternative. Harry agreed to call back within hours to set up a video conversation. When the line went dead, Meghan stood alone, phone in hand, the silence ringing louder than words. She looked around the carefully curated room, the furniture, the space, the life they had built far from palace walls. Harry's secret return to Windsor threatened all of it. She began bracing herself for a confrontation that could redefine their future. Meanwhile, the tension tightened elsewhere. William moved through the quiet corridors toward the guest wing at Windsor, his steps echoing against stones steeped in centuries of unresolved family conflict. Portraits of long-dead monarchs lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow him as he passed. His protection officer trailed behind, keeping distance. William's jaw was locked as he reached the door staff had indicated. He knocked firmly. After a moment, movement sounded inside. The door opened to Harry, dressed casually, hair uncombed, fatigue and surprise flickering across his face. Neither spoke. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Harry stepped aside and let William in. William scanned the room. An unpacked bag rested on a chair. Papers and folders covered the desk. Empty cups crowded the side table. Nothing suggested permanence. William stayed near the door as Harry closed it. Harry started to speak, but William raised a hand, stopping him cold. He demanded to know what Harry thought he was doing. Harry had walked away from royal life loudly and publicly, leveling accusations that reverberated across the world. And now he'd returned in secret, as if none of that history existed. Harry pushed back. Their father had summoned him. The king had arranged the meeting and the security. He'd answered a direct request from the monarch and from his father. He didn't need William's approval to do that. The edge in his voice betrayed uncertainty beneath the defense. William countered that nothing involving Harry could stay contained. The story had already leaked. Staff knew. Palace officials were scrambling. Harry's presence disrupted everything. Believing he could appear and disappear without consequences showed either naivete or disregard. Harry snapped that William didn't control his movements or relationships. He was exhausted by being shut out, by his brother deciding who belonged in family discussions. For years, William had excluded him. Now he was outraged that Harry had found a direct line to their father. William flushed with anger. Harry had chosen to leave, he said, and had done so by publicly tearing the family apart. Catherine had taken hits. The institution had been dragged through turmoil at a critical moment, all because Harry chose exposure over restraint. Harry fired back that William had never truly listened. Protecting the institution had always come before protecting people. William had stood aside while Meghan took the brunt of damaging briefings. Concern had arrived only after Harry was already gone. William demanded to know Harry's endgame. Did he honestly think he could craft a half-in, half-out existence, California freedom with royal advantages intact? The family had adapted without him. Catherine had stepped up. Others had filled the gaps. There was no open slot waiting. Harry insisted he wasn't returning to duties or relocating. The meeting had addressed legal and financial realities that didn't disappear with distance. He had rights tied to his place in the family, whether that was convenient or not. He was still the king's son. Voices rose. William accused Harry of wanting everything on his own terms. Harry shot back that William had always resented sharing significance. The argument hung there, raw, unresolved, and louder than the quiet castle walls could contain. The argument slid backward into old wounds neither of them had ever fully healed. Childhood slights, buried resentments, moments that had never been forgiven came rushing out, sharper with age. Accusations landed hard, words spoken that could never be pulled back. Finally, William stopped himself. He drew in a slow breath and spoke with icy control. Harry needed to decide, clearly and finally. Either recommit fully to life as a working royal, with every restriction and obligation that came with it, or accept permanent separation from the institution. There would be no halfway position. No version where Harry kept independence while still drawing from royal privilege. William would not allow the monarchy's stability to be weakened for personal convenience. Harry answered just as coldly. William had no authority to issue ultimatums. Their father was king, and decisions about family structure rested with him alone. William was still the heir, and needed to remember that. Harry would continue dealing directly with Charles, regardless of his brother's approval. The finality in his voice made it clear he considered the conversation over. William studied him for a long moment, recognizing the stubborn resolve he'd known since childhood. Without another word, he turned and walked out. Hours later, Harry sat in a sparsely decorated room at Windsor, pale walls behind him as he tried to connect the promised video call. After several rings, the screen finally lit up. Meghan appeared from her home office in Montecito. Harry looked drained, hollowed out. Meghan's expression was controlled, but her eyes burned. Harry opened with another apology. He explained the day had spiraled, one intense meeting bleeding into another. His conversation with Charles had stretched far longer than expected, and then William had arrived unannounced. Nothing had gone as planned. His voice carried a plea, searching for understanding. Meghan let him finish. Then, calmly, she asked for the timeline. When had he first known about this meeting? Harry hesitated, then admitted the initial contact had come nearly 2 weeks earlier. A private secretary had reached out requesting his presence in England for urgent family business. He'd agreed and been sworn to absolute secrecy. Meghan's composure cracked. She asked him to repeat it. 2 weeks. He had known for 2 weeks and had told his wife nothing. Harry rushed to explain. His father had insisted on total confidentiality. No leaks. No interference. This had to happen privately. Harry said he felt obligated to respect that demand. Meghan cut in sharply. She was not interference. She was his wife. His partner. Every decision touching their family required honesty. Keeping this from her wasn't discretion, it was betrayal. They had promised to move as a unit, especially where the royal family was concerned. He had broken that promise at its core. Harry defended himself, claiming secrecy was the only way the meeting could happen. If Meghan had known, she would have argued against the trip. She would have raised concerns that complicated everything. He tried to avoid conflict by handling it quietly, planning to explain once he was home. Meghan's restraint snapped. Avoiding conflict, she said, was exactly what had created it. The damage was happening now because he'd chosen omission over honesty. And his assumption that she'd object was the real issue. He hadn't trusted her enough to have the conversation. Harry shifted the focus, insisting she needed to understand the substance of the meetings. Real issues had been addressed. Legal paperwork. Estate planning tied to their children's futures. Financial structures affecting long-term security. These weren't matters that could wait or be handled remotely. Meghan demanded specifics. Had he signed anything? Harry paused, then admitted he had procedural documents, he said, nothing binding them to royal duties or changing their life. Meghan told him to send every document immediately. Harry promised he would, adding that he didn't yet have digital copies. Then Meghan voiced what she feared most. This meeting, she said, had been engineered to isolate him, to appeal to guilt, duty, and family loyalty while he was alone. Charles knew exactly how to apply pressure in person. Harry, stripped of support, was vulnerable to it. Harry insisted that wasn't true. His father had been direct, practical, fair. There had been no manipulation, only problems that demanded solutions. The screen held them both in silence, two realities colliding, neither willing to give ground. Harry had only been asked to consider options that could benefit everyone involved, but Meghan heard something different. Defending his father felt like evidence that the emotional manipulation she had feared was already taking hold. She pivoted immediately to William. Harry recounted the confrontation, the heated exchange, the ultimatum: commit fully to royal life or remain outside the institution. Meghan seized on that detail. This was exactly why secret meetings were dangerous. Harry had walked into a situation where family members could pressure him, corner him, attempt to force decisions without his partner's input. Harry bristled. No one had forced him. He was capable of making his own choices, of resisting influence. Meghan's implication that he could be swayed so easily felt dismissive, even insulting. He had navigated back-to-back difficult conversations all day without yielding. His family did not control him, no matter her fears. Meghan's voice sharpened. Actions spoke louder than words. He'd kept the trip secret because he anticipated her questioning, had met his father without witnesses, and had signed documents without consulting her or their lawyers. Each choice confirmed exactly what she had warned about, an openness to influence that put them at risk. Harry's desire to maintain ties with people who had hurt them both had left him vulnerable. Harry shot back, accusing her of trying to cut him off entirely. Did she want him never to speak to his father or brother again? Was that her plan? That wasn't healthy, and it wasn't the life he wanted. He needed balance between marriage and family. Meghan countered, her tone cold and deliberate. The crisis was his creation. She hadn't demanded he avoid his family. She had demanded transparency and partnership in decisions affecting both of them. He had failed that test. Now, she needed to decide whether she could trust him, or whether his loyalty to the royal family would always override his commitment to their marriage. The weight of the accusation hung between them, stretching across the video feed. Harry's face fell as he realized how deeply he had hurt her. He tried to backtrack, to reassure her that she and the children came first. Meghan cut him off. She needed time alone, without his explanations or justifications. She would speak with him again once he returned to California. The call ended abruptly as she closed her laptop before he could respond. Questions now hovered in the air. Could Harry maintain meaningful relationships with his father and brother while living permanently in California? Would Meghan accept any arrangement involving regular contact with Windsor Castle? How would Charles reconcile his duties as king with his role as father when the two collided? The answers were far from clear. The secret trip had solved nothing, instead exposing tensions that everyone had hoped to manage privately. Harry faced consequences for his dishonesty. William confronted ongoing challenges from a brother unwilling to choose sides. Charles faced the possibility that his son's relationship with him and the family might be irreparably strained. The fallout from one night's clandestine meetings would reverberate for months to come. Do you think Harry should have attended the meeting with his father at all? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, like and subscribe to stay updated. Before you go, check out the other videos on your screen. You won't want to miss them.